Welcome everyone to our Canadian Diabetes Association National Webinar Series. My name is Farah Ismail and I am a Program Manager here at the CDA, and I will be your host for today. We are absolutely delighted that you're able to join us for the webinar to learn about working the glycemic index into meal planning. Now, to start off, I would like to draw your attention to our survey that's at the top right-hand section of your screen. So in order to better serve your needs, we kindly ask that you provide us with your input by completing the short survey towards the end of the presentation. And we thank you in advance for your input. Throughout the presentation, you will have the opportunity to type in the Q&A box, and that's located at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We ask that you use this box for any questions you may have along the way, and our presenter, Andrea, will be happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation, time permitting. As well, we will be displaying a few polling questions throughout the presentation, and we would love for your participation. These questions are really created to help CDA gauge who our audience members are. Please note that your answers are completely anonymous. Also note that you are able to customize your screen to expand or collapse any of the screens that you see, so do feel free to adjust them as needed simply by dragging down the bottom right-hand side of the corner. The presentation itself will run for about 40 to 45 minutes in length, with about 15 minutes at the end left for questions. And I'd just like to note that we will be recording and posting the webinar on our Canadian Diabetes Association website at a later date. So now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Andrea Glenn, and thank her for joining us today. But before turning it over to Andrea, I would like to give you a brief introduction. Andrea Glenn is a registered dietitian with an MSc in Nutritional Sciences. She has 3 years of experience working in glycemic index, nutrition education research. She's worked as a study dietitian at the University of Toronto, where she's counseled diabetes patients on how to include low GI foods in their diet. Andrea has also assisted in the development of a type 2 diabetes prevention program that combines physical activity and a healthy low GI diet at Women's College. For more information on Andrea, please read the speaker bio section, and that's to the left-hand side of your screen. So without further ado, I present to you Andrea.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, Farah, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. So I'm first going to start out with a few polling questions, and then we'll move on to the introduction of the glycemic index and what it is, and then I'll discuss some research on the benefits of including low GI foods in your diet, particularly for diabetes management. And then we'll move on to meal planning and how you can include low GI foods into your diet. So the first polling question that we have here is just asking, what age group do you belong to? So I'll give you about 20 or 30 seconds to complete, and then we'll move on to the answers. Okay, so let's see. All right, so it looks like most people are in the 40 to 59 age range. And we'll also move on to the next question now. So this question is, how are you affected by diabetes? So you can pick the best choice there for you, and I'll give you about 20 seconds to answer. Okay, so let's see. So it looks like most people here listed say they have type 2 diabetes, about 47%. We have some healthcare professionals, and then your family or friend member has diabetes, so that's great. So the last polling question before we get started is, what is the glycemic index? So I'm just curious to see what you know about the glycemic index. I have 3 definitions here, which are the effect that a food or meal has on blood sugar after eating it, a scale that ranks carbohydrate-rich foods by how much they raise blood sugar compared to a standard food, and the carbohydrate-rich foods are foods that include sugar, starch, and fiber, or is it a number that estimates how much the food will raise a person's blood sugar after eating it? So I'll give you a few seconds to pick an answer, and then we'll see what everyone says. Okay, so let's see what everyone says. So 71% picked a scale that ranks carbohydrate-rich foods by how much they raise blood sugar compared to a standard food, and that is the correct answer. So the glycemic index is the classification of blood sugar raising potential of carbohydrate-containing foods. Carbohydrate-containing foods, when I'm talking about this is all the food groups except the meat and alternatives and the fat and oils. And the glycemic index measures the extent to which the available carbohydrate in a food raises blood sugar compared to an equal amount of glucose. So remember in the definition, I mentioned there's a standard food, and that standard food is glucose. And when I'm referring to available carbohydrate, I'm referring to the total amount of carbohydrate in the food minus the fiber. And the standard food glucose has a glycemic index of 100. So when compared to glucose, foods that have a GI of 70 or more are considered high GI foods, and they raise blood sugar fast and high. And foods that have a GI of 69 to 55 are medium GI foods, and they raise blood sugar levels less quickly than the high GI foods. And finally, the foods that have a GI of 55 or less are considered low GI, and they raise blood sugar slowly and gradually. So the next slide here shows a graph, and this shows how high and low GI foods affect your blood sugar levels or your glycemic response. So just to orient you, on the y-axis, you have your blood glucose levels, and then on the x-axis you have the time in hours. So as you can see, the high GI foods, which is the red line, raises blood sugar faster and higher than the low glycemic index foods. And the high GI foods also result in a drop in blood sugar much more quickly than the low GI foods. And some of you may have seen this type of graph before. If you've been taught anything about the glycemic index, it's commonly used to teach how it affects blood sugar on your glycemic response. On your glycemic index on your glycemic response, but it also has caused some confusion in that sometimes people have confused the glycemic index and the glycemic response. So because of this, I'm just going to define what the difference is between glycemic index and glycemic response. So this slide here shows a table that shows the differences between the two glycemic index and glycemic response. So I'll start with glycemic index, and that it is a property of a food, and it measures the quality of carbohydrate in that food. And it is not affected by the amount of carbohydrate, protein, or fat. And the glycemic response is different, and that is the impact that a food has on your blood sugar, and it's more of a property of a person. So the glycemic response is determined by the quality of the carbohydrate as well as the quantity, or how much you eat in one sitting. And the glycemic response can be lowered by adding protein or fat to the food. So as an example, I'll use one slice of white bread. White bread is high GI, or high glycemic index, and it has a GI of 71. And the glycemic response to the white bread will be high because it's a high glycemic index food, but it will be even higher if you have 2 slices of bread. And the GI will still be 71 even if you have 2 slices of bread. And then if you add protein or fat to the bread, so say you add some cheese or peanut butter, the glycemic response to the bread will be lowered, but the glycemic index of the bread will still be 71 with the addition of the cheese or peanut butter. So how do low GI foods lower blood glucose? So there are some mechanisms in how the low GI foods lower blood glucose levels. So the first is increased fiber intake. So many low GI foods are higher in fiber than high GI foods, and more fiber in food slows the rate of digestion and causes a more gradual and lower rise in blood sugar. And low GI foods also reduce the rate of carbohydrate or sugar absorption in the intestines and bowel, regardless of the carbohydrate intake. Fiber content, and this is due to the different types of starches found in the low GI foods. And the starches that are found in the low GI foods are absorbed more slowly through your intestinal tract. And then there's also some research showing that low GI foods may improve insulin secretion and sensitivity. And the evidence for this is that low GI diets may improve the function of the cells in the pancreas that secrete insulin, and this may be important for the prevention and progression of type 2 diabetes. So why should we choose lower GI foods? So there has been about 30 years of research on the glycemic index, and most of this research is pertaining to diabetes management as well as some for diabetes prevention. So for prevention, research has found that eating low GI foods in place of high GI foods can help reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes as well as heart disease. And research also supports that lower GI foods can help with weight management, as the slower absorption rate and higher fiber intake of the foods can make you feel full longer. And then lastly, following a low GI diet has been found to be beneficial for the management of type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. So first I'll talk about type 1 diabetes, and this is a type of diabetes in which the pancreas does not produce any insulin, and insulin therapy is required for treatment. So research has found that following a low GI diet in type 1 diabetes can improve blood sugar control after eating a meal, and it can also lower A1C levels through less fluctuations in blood sugar and reduce the risk of heart disease. And for those of you who may not know, A1C levels are the average blood glucose levels over a 3-month period, and this is used to see how well someone is managing their diabetes. So now moving on to type 2 diabetes, which is the most common type of diabetes, and this is when your body does not produce enough insulin or your body does not properly use the insulin that it makes. And research has shown that following a low GI diet has similar findings to type 1. So it helps with improving blood sugar control after eating. It may lower A1C levels and also reduce the risk of heart disease. But there also is some research showing that it may increase insulin sensitivity and require less medication use to manage your blood sugar. And then the last diabetes that I'll talk about today is gestational diabetes. So this is a type of diabetes that occurs only when you are pregnant and your body cannot produce enough insulin to handle the effects of a growing baby and the changing hormone levels. Usually goes away after the baby is born, but those who have had gestational diabetes are at a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And research has found that following a low GI diet during pregnancy has improved blood sugar control after eating. There's a less risk for gestational age babies, and this may reduce the likelihood of childhood obesity later on in life. And there's also research supporting that there's a less need for insulin, as well as less weight gain during pregnancy. All right, so this statement that I'm showing here is from the Canadian Diabetes Association Clinical Practice Guidelines. And this refers to, I'll just read it, it's replacing high glycemic index carbohydrates with low glycemic index carbohydrates in mixed meals has a clinically significant benefit for glycemic control in people with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And it mentions glycemic control because the best evidence for low GI has been in blood sugar management. And you may notice that gestational diabetes is not on there. And the reason is that the research that I showed on the previous slide is done mainly out of Australia, but there is some research currently going on in Canada that may change that with my colleagues Dr. Wolliver and Shannon Grant. So I've been involved with a study looking at the benefits of a low GI diet during pregnancy in gestational diabetes, and the results of the study should actually be known soon. But before I move on to some different types of low or high and low GI foods, I just want to talk about what mixed meals are, because some people may not be familiar with that term. So what are mixed meals? Mixed meals are a meal that contains sources of carbohydrates, fat, and protein from different food and food groups. So you can see the picture that's showing there is a picture of lasagna, which includes a number of different food groups. There is some bread, and then there's also some salad. So according to the Canadian Diabetes Association statement that we saw on the last slide, you would switch out a high GI food here for a low GI food to help control blood sugar. So let's move on to some high and low GI foods. So the slide here is from the Canadian Diabetes Association Glycemic Index tool. Some of you may be familiar with this, and it's actually included in the resource section of the webinar, so you can open that up and you can download it onto your computer. And for today, I'm going to focus on grains and starches, as research has shown that substituting 60% of your grains and starches to low GI grains and starches can significantly lower your dietary GI. And this has been shown in the lab that I've worked in, as well as others, to translate into a decrease in blood sugar. So I'll first orient you to the high glycemic index column in the table. So you'll see there's the breads first, and this would include most of your white flour products, like white bread and white bagels. Then you'll see some cereals listed, cold cereals like bran flakes, corn flakes, and Rice Krispies. Under grains, we have short grain rice listed here, so this would include your sticky rice or your jasmine rice. And then the other foods would be your russet potatoes, french fries, pretzels, rice crackers, and soda crackers. And then under the medium GI group, we have your whole wheat and rye breads. And then for cereal, we have things like grape nuts, puffed wheat, and quick oats. And then for grains, we have basmati rice, brown rice, and couscous. And then for other, we have some new and white potatoes, sweet corn, popcorn, stoned wheat thins, Ryvita rye crisps, and some soup. And before I move on to the low GI group, I'd just like to give you an example of how you may be able to lower the diet or the GI of your diet. So for example, if you're someone who really likes to have pretzels when you're at the movies, you could actually switch that out into popcorn. This is a higher fiber, lower GI option. It's not low GI, but it's still lower than the pretzels, so it'll be a better choice for blood sugar control. And now moving on to the low GI group. So these are the foods that we'll ask you to choose most often. So under breads, we have the 100% stone ground whole wheat, heavy mixed grain, and pumpernickel. For cereal, we have all bran or bran buds with psyllium and oat bran. In the grains, we have barley, bulgur, pasta, and parboiled or converted rice. And then for other, we have sweet potato, yam, and the legumes such as lentils, chickpeas, and other types of beans. And just to add some more variety, I'd like to add a few more food items under the low GI column for you. So first I'll add, it's called Stone Mill Bakehouse bread. So this is a type of bread that you can find in most grocery stores, and it has been tested and is a low GI option for bread. For cereal, we have some Red River cereal. So I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but this is also a low GI cereal. And then for grains, we have quinoa. So quinoa is quite popular these days, and that's another low GI grain choice. We have mung bean noodles, buckwheat, and buckwheat could be called buckwheat groats or kasha, depending where you're buying it. And then also soba noodles, and soba noodles are actually made from buckwheat as well. And then for the last one, I will offer cold potato. So this is a potato that has been cooked and then cooled in the fridge. So you can eat it cold, and this actually lowers the GI of the potato. And this is great with summer coming up, and lots of people are going off to barbecues and picnics. So cold potato salad is a great low GI option for a side for a barbecue. All right, so now looking at some factors that influence the glycemic index of foods, I'd like to talk about two today, such as cooking methods and food processing. So when you cook a food, the starch molecules in the food swell up and the food becomes softer, and this speeds up the rate of digestion when you eat it. And a good example of this is pasta. So you may have noticed that pasta was on the low GI list on the last slide, but pasta is only low GI if you cook it until it is al dente or firm, so not soft pasta. Because if you cook it too long, the starch becomes more available and it's a higher GI pasta. And the cooking time for al dente pasta should be included on the package, so the recommended cooking time. But I'd suggest that you keep an eye out when you're cooking it just to make sure that it's not turning too soft, just in case it's not quite exactly what's listed on the package. And then the potatoes, so as I mentioned on the last slide, cooling cooked potatoes results in a lower GI. And this is because the starch in the potato turns gel-like when cooled, and this becomes more resistant to digestion when you eat it. And I am generalizing this to all potato types, but the research has shown that this is specifically for red potatoes. And then the last part that I'll talk about is food processing. So milled or refined grains, so these are your highly processed grains, they result in the grains becoming more easily digested, so we recommend to choose whole grains whenever possible. And a good example of this is oats. So there were some listed on the list that I just showed you. So for example, something like instant oats, which is highly processed, and they're the most refined oats, they have the highest GI. And then if you think about quick oats, they're a little bit less processed, but still processed, and they have a medium GI. and then the whole grain oats that are not processed, so like your large flake or your steel cut oats, they have a low GI. So I have my next polling question for you now that we know a little bit about the GI. So if a food is low glycemic index, it means I can eat as much of it as I want. And I'll give you about 20 seconds to answer. Okay, great. So yes, it's false. 97% of you answered false. So that's true. Just because a food is low GI, you still need to pay attention to portion sizes of the foods. Large portion sizes of low glycemic index foods will still cause a high glycemic response or blood sugar after eating it. So it's important to include or layer the glycemic index knowledge on top of healthy eating guidelines. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what healthy eating guidelines are. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen Canada's Food Guide before. And Canada's Food Guide recommends to choose a variety of foods from each food group. So that includes your vegetables and fruit, your grains and starches, your milk and alternatives, and your meat and alternatives. And the serving sizes are recommended, as well as how many servings per day, depending on your age or life cycle. And this is recommended on having about 45 to 60% of your calories come from carbohydrates, 15 to 20% to come from protein, and 35% or less from fat. And then it's also recommended to choose higher fiber options. And so the people with diabetes, specifically adults with diabetes, the fiber recommendations are actually a bit higher than the general population to help with blood sugar control. So the recommendations are 25 to 50 grams of fiber per day with adults with diabetes. And for those that are in the general population, the recommendations are 25 to 38 grams per day. Another recommendation is the plate method. Some of you may have seen this before as well. This is a great way for healthy eating guidelines as well as for meal planning. And this may be a bit more visual and easier to follow than Canada's Food Guide. So the plate method recommends that half of your plate be made up of non-starchy vegetables. They recommend at least 2 kinds. So that could be something like your leafy greens or broccoli or tomatoes, cauliflower, those sort of non-starchy vegetables. A quarter of your plate should be protein. So this would be fish, lean meat, chicken, beans or lentils, maybe tofu in there. And it's recommended to try vegetarian sources a couple times a week, specifically beans and lentils as they're low GI, and you could do more if you like. And then quarter of your plate is dedicated to carbohydrates. So this will include something like potato, rice, corn, or pasta. And this is where I'd like you to think about what you would normally have on this portion of your plate and what you could have that would be low GI for that. So if you're someone who really likes potato, maybe that would be a cold potato salad. Or if you're someone who really likes pasta, making sure that it's not cooked too long. Or maybe it'll be something like barley or bulgur on the side. And then on the side of the plate, there's the dairy alternatives and the fruit. So you can have this with the meal, or you can have it as a snack later on. It depends on how hungry you are, as well as your individualized meal plan. So now we'll move on to some tips on how to lower the GI of your meals and snacks. So the first tip that I have here is working with a registered dietitian to find lower GI food choices. And this is to find choices that fit into your own individualized meal plan or regimen, and they can also help you with portion sizes and other meal planning tips too. Our second tip is to substitute at least one high or medium GI food for a low GI choice at each meal and snack. And we recommend that or suggest that it's only one per meal and snack because research has shown that substituting at least one can show a benefit for blood sugar management. You are welcome to do more, of course, but just the one is okay. And then we recommend that you do this most days of the week. So you most likely won't be able to have a low GI meal for every meal and snack, but trying to do this for most days of the week should help with blood sugar management. And when you do swap any of the high GI foods for low GI foods in your meals, be sure to check your blood sugar 2 hours later to see how the change affects your blood sugar. So the third tip that I have here is if you are eating a high or medium GI option, mix or add in a low GI option. So what I mean by this is a few different things that you can try doing. The first one is if you're someone who really likes cereal, cold cereal, and it's a higher GI option, what you could do is replace a third of the cup of the high GI cereal with bran buds, and this will help lower your glycemic response to that cereal. So you won't be adding the bran buds, to actually replace the cereal with a third cup of bran buds. You could also mix half and half of your rice of choice with parboiled rice to lower the GI of the rice. So if you're someone and you really like basmati rice or a sticky rice, or you have a bunch at home and you don't want to waste it, an option to lower the GI of the rice is to cook some parboiled rice and also mix it in with the rice, with the higher GI rice. And then the last tip, if you're someone who likes to bake, you can replace some of the white or whole wheat flour in, say, your bread or your muffins with large flake oats, Red River cereal, oat bran, or chickpea flour to lower the GI of the food. And you can play around with these different types of low GI grains and see which one suits your personal taste the best. And then the last tip that I have is choose low GI options when eating outside of the home. So when I was working on the study in which we were suggesting a low GI diet to gestational diabetes patients, a lot of them were interested in finding low GI options outside of the home, and they also found it difficult at times. And not every place will have low GI options, but if you could keep an eye out for certain foods that might be able to help you choose a lower GI option when you're eating at a restaurant or cafe or sandwich shop. So you can look out for bean or legume-based dishes. So if you're at a salad bar, they might have some salads that have beans in it. That would be a good choice. Or a dal dish, which is a lentil-based dish, is good. You can also look out for pumpernickel rye bread if you're at, say, a sandwich shop. But if you are going to be choosing pumpernickel rye bread, you should ask the people who work at the sandwich shop if it's real pumpernickel rye bread, because sometimes in North America, pumpernickel rye bread is just white bread with molasses added, and that's still high GI, so you have to ask and make sure that it's the real pumpernickel rye bread. And then last is to look for dishes that are made with whole grains. So this could be quinoa, it could be barley, it could be bulgur-based. Any types of whole grains, you can add that to, or choose that when you're eating outside of the home. Okay, so now I have 2 low GI activities for us to do. You kind of do at home. The first one is based on the last tip that we just did, so eating outside of the home and choosing low GI options. So we're going to pretend that you didn't bring your lunch to work one day and you find yourself at Tim Hortons for lunch. And I chose Tim Hortons because Canada and Canadians love their Tim Hortons, and you can find Tim Hortons in most towns across the country. So we're going to look at the menu and we're going to pick what we think is the lowest GI lunch option. And then for the second activity, we're going to do a low GI meal substitution. So I'm going to show you a breakfast, lunch, and dinner that someone might eat, and we're going to swap at least one high GI or medium GI choice out for a lower GI choice. And for these activities, we're going to be focusing on the glycemic index, but I want everyone who's listening right now to think about portion sizes, Canada's Food Guide, and the plate method, as well as other healthy eating principles in general when we're doing this activity. So the first one that I have here is the Tim Hortons menu. So if you can just take a few moments to look at the menu and think, if you were at Tim Hortons and this were your options, what would you choose that would be the lowest GI? Okay, so I hope everyone has picked something. we don't have a polling question for this one, but if I were to pick the lowest GI choice here, I would pick chili. Chili has lots of beans in it, and beans are a low GI option. There's also a few other things that you could pick here. So the vegetable beef barley soup that has barley in it, that's another low GI option. And then as well the new, the new sweet potato bisque from sweet potatoes. They're also low GI. So of course that's another good option as well. Just remembering all of these options here that we chose today were soup. So when you're thinking about soup, you have to think about balancing out the meal as well as the sodium content. And Tim Hortons has all of their nutrition facts listed online, so you can always look online and see the nutrition facts of each of these foods before you make your choice. So our next activity is the low GI substitution activity. So on the right-hand side, this might be a breakfast that someone might eat. So we have a bowl of Rice Krispies, a slice of white bread, a glass of milk, and some strawberries. And on the other side of the screen, I am showing some options that we can swap things out with. So I have pumpernickel rye bread, a muffin, a bagel, and then a Red River cereal. I know it's kind of hard to see what that is, but that's Red River cereal. So just at home or wherever you are right now, just think about what you could do to make this meal a lower GI meal. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do some of the swapping here. So an option that you could do is that you could switch out the white bread for the pumpernickel rye bread, and that would lower the GI of the meal. Or if you want to keep the bread, you could switch out the Rice Krispies for the Red River cereal. And then, of course, you could always do both, but it's only recommended to do, you only really have to do one if that's what you choose. So the next meal here, so this is someone's lunch. On the right-hand side, we're going to pretend that this is a salad. So someone's throwing a bunch of items to make a salad. We have some short grain rice. We have chickpeas, we have cucumbers, we have corn, kale, tomatoes, and tofu. And then the other side, we have a few options to swap something with. So we have pumpernickel rye bread again, we have white bread, we have lentils, and then we have black quinoa. So just thinking about if this is your lunch, what would you switch in order to make it lower GI? Okay, so for an option here, we could switch out the white rice for the black quinoa, or just any type of quinoa, and that would lower the GI. Or we could also keep the white rice if you really wanted to, and then switch out the corn for the lentils, and that would lower the GI of the meal as well. And again, you could do both. It's really up to how much you'd like to do. All right, and last but not least, we have the dinner. So on the dinner we have chicken, we have a baked potato, we have broccoli, and we have cauliflower. And this one, there's only one option here to switch out, so it may be a bit easier for you. But our substitutions that we can switch in, we have pasta. So we're going to pretend that this is firm or al dente pasta. We have another white potato here that we're going to pretend it's cooled. And then we have a sweet potato, and then we have French fries. So I'm sure you all know which ones we can switch with. So we could have the al dente pasta instead of the baked potato. We could have the sweet potato instead of the baked potato, or we could have cold potato. And that would make a low GI meal. So some key points to remember after this webinar to take home with you is first that the glycemic index should be used with healthy eating guidelines, so such as Canada's Food Guide, the plate method, and still watching your portion sizes. So the glycemic index should be layered on top of these, so you still have to follow healthy eating, and then you switch out your carbohydrate, grains, and starches to a lower GI choice. And then again, aiming to substitute one high or medium GI food for a low GI food at each meal and snack. You can do more if you like, and try to do this most days of the week if possible. And then the last one is try out new foods and recipes. So on the low GI list that I showed you earlier, you may have seen some foods you've never tried before. So I encourage you to try some new low GI foods and grains. Maybe you'll really like it and it'll fit well into your own meal plans, as well as trying some new recipes that will include low GI options as well. And last but not least, I'd like to talk about some resources. There's a couple of resources here. So the first one is the Glycemic Index tool from the Canadian Diabetes Association. So this is a tool on the back. It showed the table that we were looking at earlier, and this resource is also included in the webinar that you can download. And actually, my colleague Shannon Grant and some people at the CDA and other healthcare professionals and myself have been working on updating this tool, so stay tuned for a new updated version of the Glycemic Index tool. Another option here is the New Glucose Revolution. So this is a book. It's written by Dr. Jenny Brand-Miller. She's a GI researcher out of Australia. They do a lot of glycemic index work in Australia. And Dr. Thomas Wolliver, so he's also been involved with inventing the glycemic index, and he's from the University of Toronto. And this book talks about the glycemic index. It shows lots of lists of different low GI foods and also has lots of great recipes. And then the last one is glycemicindex.com. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this website before, but it has lots of great books and cookbooks on it that you can look at and purchase. And it also has a searchable database. So this is a database that's very up to date of lots of different foods from lots of different countries. So if you're interested in a particular food, you can go to this website and see what the glycemic index of that food is. But I will mention that sometimes when you're searching for a food on this website, particularly if you're searching for something that's a bit generic, such as whole wheat bread, you might get a lot of results coming up. And if that happens, you can click on them and you can see which country the glycemic index was tested in. And if it was tested in Canada, then I would recommend using that glycemic index value, as the foods tested in Canada are more applicable to the foods we eat in Canada, as sometimes the same foods in different countries are actually made up of different things. So just keeping that in mind if you're using that website. So my last question for you today is, will you plan to use the information from today to lower the GI of your diet? And I'll just give you a few minutes to answer, or seconds, sorry. Okay, wow, 100% said yes. That's great. I'm glad everyone learned something new today and thinks that they can add some lower GI food options to their diet and meal planning. So I'd like to thank everyone today, and I'm going to pass it off to Farah for to moderate the question and answer period.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrea. That was an amazing presentation and very informative. And myself, and I'm sure all the participants definitely do appreciate all the great information you've been able to share with us today. Now, folks, there's been some really great questions here on our Q&A section of the webinar. I do have over 60 questions here, so I mean, we will try our best to get as many as we can answered today. But just so you know, we do have an email address. That's webinars@diabetes.ca. And we do hope that for all the questions that we didn't get through today, please email us and we will try our best to answer you as soon as possible. So with that being said, I'll start off with the first question. One of our participants have said, I have a copy of Rick Gallup's book from the 2003 edition. Is there anything that's more recent or a revised edition?
All right, thank you. I have heard of Rick Gallup's book. I'm actually not sure if there is a up-to-date version of this book, but the book that I mentioned at the end of the presentation is updated every couple of years, so that's a great resource if you are looking for a new book to purchase about the glycemic index.
Great, thanks for that response. Okay, so moving on to the next question, Andrea. One of our participants has asked, what's the difference between glycemic index and a glycemic load?
Okay, so yes, sometimes people ask about the difference between the glycemic index and glycemic load. So the glycemic index, as we talked about, it's a property of a food, and the food it classifies it based on its sugar-raising potential. The glycemic load is different in that it includes the glycemic index as well as how much food you're actually eating, so the serving size that you would normally eat, and that estimates how much your blood sugar will be raised after that. So for example, I guess just saying white bread has a glycemic index of 71, and if you had 2 slices of white bread, you would times 71 times the amount of servings you're going to have, and that would give an estimate of how much your blood sugar would be raised.
Great, thanks for that response. One of our next participants has asked, where is quinoa on the GI?
Yes, so quinoa is actually in the low glycemic index group. So I know it's not on the Canadian Diabetes Association tool, but I did bring it up during the presentation. So quinoa is a great option for low GI.
Great, and we have another participant that's asked about tortillas. Do you have an idea of where that might fit in terms of GI?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if you're thinking about the glycemic index tool that we were looking at, it was showing that white bread is high GI, and then the medium bread is also, the whole wheat bread is medium GI. So if it's a white-based tortilla, then it would be in the the high GI, and I believe the corn tortillas would fall in there as well. And then the whole wheat would be more of the medium GI.
Great, thanks for that clarification and for that response. We have had quite a few folks ask about pasta. Now I know we did mention that pasta did have a lower GI earlier. Andrea had mentioned that, and I think participants are looking to understand the difference, if there is a difference rather, between perhaps egg noodles, wheat pasta, white pasta, rice pasta.
Sure, so the wheat pasta, I'll start with that one. So wheat pasta, if it's white or whole wheat, it will be low GI as long as it's cooked firm. Obviously the whole wheat one has more fiber, so that is a better in terms of fiber, but both white and whole wheat have a low GI. Egg noodles, so there was noodles mentioned in there, those are also low GI. But the rice noodles, they are actually high GI. They're based from a short grain white rice, and they're very processed, so they would be a high GI option.
Great, thanks for that response, Andrea. We have another participant that's asked a two-part question. So the first part is, how late could one have a snack before bed? Also, if it is a fruit, is there a time limit?
So that's a good question as well. This would really depend on the individual, and I would suggest maybe going to see a dietitian and seeing how that would fit into your own individualized meal plan, depending on your goals, if you're taking any medications, and they would help you out with finding out which is the best time if you need a bedtime snack, and what's the best time. And same with the fruit as well.
Great, thanks for that response. We have another question here from one of our participants. They've suggested that there is a controversy around corn. Is cooked corn or corn on the cob a good choice with all the corn that is already included in so much of processed food? And fructose corn syrup obviously is high in sugar. Is corn ever a good option?
All right, so the controversy around corn. So cooked corn or corn on the cob, as you may remember from the glycemic index tool, that's actually a medium GI choice. So if you're having a high GI choice and you're having the corn instead, you would be lowering the GI of your diet. However, if you wanted to lower the GI even further, then you would choose something other than corn. And in terms, I think it was the high fructose corn syrup. So this is a sugar, and any sugar you need to be mindful of not having too much.
Great, thanks for that response. We actually have had quite a few participants ask about drink options and if there are better ones than others. And some of the examples they've asked about are milk, juice, smoothies, alcohol, including beer and wine. Do you have any recommendations around that?
Sure. So in terms of the glycemic index, I was just talking about the grains and starches today. That's what I was focusing on. But for smoothies, juice, and milk, most of the fruit and milk are lower GI options. If you're interested in learning more about different fruits, I'd also suggest talking to a registered dietitian to help you with that. But the juice would also be careful with the sugar content. So juice is usually high in sugar, and that may affect your blood sugar. And the same goes for alcohol as well. That may affect your blood sugar.
Great, thanks for that response. We'll move on to our next question. So one of our participants have asked, would you recommend energy bars as part of a low GI diet?
So that's a good question. This would fall within the snacks, if you're interested in having a snack. So energy bars as part of a low GI diet. Yes, they definitely can fit within a low GI diet. If you're looking for lower GI bars or granola bars, energy bars, the kind bar that you did mention, it's mainly nut-based, so the nut-based bars are good ones as well to choose for a snack.
Perfect, and we'll move on to our next question. How does dairy fit into this? And that includes cheese, yogurt, milk, and so on.
Yes, so I didn't talk about dairy today specifically because pretty much all dairy is low glycemic index. And it does contain carbohydrates, so they're all good choices. Just include that when if you're ever doing carb counting, that dairy does have carbohydrates in it.
Great, thanks for that. And another common question that we've had from some of our participants, why is parboiled rice lower in GI?
So parboiled rice, I'm not sure if many of you know how it's made. So when rice is picked, it's inside a husk, and for parboiled rice, the rice is boiled inside the husk, and then once it's boiled, the husk and the bran is removed. So parboiled rice is kind of one of the exceptions to the rule where I said that less processed food is typically higher GI, whereas parboiled rice is actually a bit more processed than something like brown rice, but it has a lower GI. And the reason of this is because the processing method actually makes the starch in the parboiled rice become a little gel-like, and the type of starch that that comes from this processing actually digests quite more slowly in your intestinal tract compared to other starches.
Great, thanks for that response. We have another participant that's asking for some assistance in terms of what are better options between artificial sugars, white sugars, brown sugar, and raw sugar.
All right, so artificial sugars, they do not have a glycemic index, as they do not have any carbohydrate in them, so they don't really affect your blood sugar. And then white, brown, and raw sugar, they all have the same glycemic index, and they're all something that you might want to watch how much you're having, because they can raise your blood sugar.
Great, thanks for that response. We did have another question with regards to beverages again, and somebody has asked, are diet drinks safe regarding GI?
I'm not sure what you mean by diet drinks. If you're referring to something like your sugar or your non-caloric sweetened beverages like Diet Pepsi or something. And in terms of that for blood sugar, they do not have a glycemic index as they don't contain any carbohydrates.
Great, thank you for that response. This might have been a second part to that question, but a participant has asked about Glucerna or Diabetic Boost.
Okay, so Glucerna or Diabetic Boost, so those are the drinks that are specialized for diabetes patients. I don't remember exactly the research on them, but I do think they have a lower GI if you look them up on glycemicindex.com. So if that is something you include in your meal plan, if you feel that's necessary, not everyone needs to drink these drinks, but I do believe that they are a low glycemic index.
Great, thanks for that response, Andrea. And just a reminder to our participants again, for the questions that we haven't gotten to today, do email us at webinars@diabetes.ca, and we'll be sure to answer and follow up with you. So we have time for just a few more questions. One of our participants has asked if there is a better option between Splenda, using honey, or using maple syrup.
All right, so this is similar to the other question that we had before. Splenda does not contain any carbohydrates, so it would not affect, it doesn't have a glycemic index, and it wouldn't affect your blood sugar. And honey and maple syrup, they're both sugar. They both have a high glycemic index, so of course just watching how much you have if you are having a honey or maple syrup in foods.
Great, thanks for that response. One of our participants, and this might have come from learning a little bit about the cold potato versus the cooked potato, but we do have a participant that's asked the difference between cold carrots, such as raw carrots, or cooked carrots, and if there's one that's better for GI.
All right, so carrots fall within the non-starchy vegetable group. So they do have a GI, but I was focusing on grains and starches today. So having either in your meal plan and having on half your plate, I wouldn't worry about if it was cooked or raw carrots. Either were fine.
Great, thanks for that clarification. We do have another participant that's asked about bananas, and if they're high in GI.
Yes, so today I didn't cover fruit. I was focusing on the grains and starches today, as the research has shown that just focusing on grains and starches can have a pretty big impact on blood sugar. So I didn't talk about fruit. So bananas are a higher GI fruit, but I would encourage you to talk to your or to a dietitian about different fruits and the glycemic index and how you can include that into your own glycemic index plan.
Great, thanks for that response. We have another participant that's asked, how much protein should I have for each meal?
All right, so if you're thinking about the, I guess the quarter of your plate, that's protein. So if you're having quarter of your plate protein, so that should be enough. And less focusing on grams and more focusing on just amounts, it's a little bit easier to think about. Another way would be to think about the size of the palm of your hand for a meat serving. Or if you're having something like tofu, it's about 3/4 of a cup. Or if you're having something like beans and lentils, it's I believe it's 1/2 cup to 1 cup.
Great, thank you for that response, Andrea. We have a few other questions, and I'm not sure if they're completely in your realm, but I will ask them anyway, and if we can't get a response again, you guys can contact us at CDA. So we do have one of our participants that have asked, what is the impact of salt, if there is any?
So salt does not affect the glycemic index of foods, but it's a good question. Salt, obviously something that's salt that you need to watch out for. Choosing lower sodium options is good, but that will not impact the glycemic index of the food.
Great, thanks for that response. We have another participant that's asked, The Canadian Food Guide gives information about normal North American foods, but there are a lot of recent immigrants from all parts of the world that have come to Canada. Many foods we eat are not listed in many GI lists. Where can I find that information?
Yeah, so that's great. I would recommend that you go to glycemicindex.com if there are specific foods that you're interested in. They have tested many foods from different parts of the world. And I would also recommend that you maybe speak with a dietitian, and they can help you find foods that you normally eat that might not be on the GI tool that we looked at that are low glycemic index and that can fit into your meal plan.
Great, thanks for that response. So we'll probably have about 2 more questions until we wrap it up. One of our next participants, has asked, are wraps a good alternative to bread, or are they high in GI?
So this is similar, I guess, to the question about the tortillas. So depending which type of bread and type of wrap you're having, they may be a better choice. So if you're having white bread and then having a whole wheat tortilla, I would go with the whole wheat tortilla. But of course, there are lots of low GI breads that were listed on the CDA tool. So that would be your heavy mixed grain breads, your pumpernickel bread, or your stone mill bread. So if you're having those types of breads, those would be a good choice over a wrap.
Great, and thanks for that. So for our last question, one of our participants has asked, should people with diabetes eat less carbs than healthy people? So the recommendations for the general population, as well as those for type 2 diabetes for carbohydrates, is the same. So Canada's Food Guide, the 45 to 60% of your calories from carbohydrates is recommended for both diabetes as well as for the general population. The difference
is that there's a higher recommendation for fiber intake for diabetes patients. But of course, this can be very individualized in how much you should include in your diet, if it's closer to 45 or if it's closer to 60. So you could work with a dietitian to find out which matches your meal plan and your lifestyle better.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrea, and thanks for such a wonderful presentation. I'd just like to take a moment to thank you on behalf of the Canadian Diabetes Association for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge and teaching us all about the GI with meal planning. I just wanted to send a thank you out to all of you guys that are still on the line and those who've participated in the Q&A. We really do appreciate you guys, logging in and participating, and we hope you've gotten, everything you've needed to out of this session. We'd also want to send a quick thank you to our volunteers who helped coordinate this session. We do have 2 more webinars planned that are coming up. So we have one next week on why we should exercise, and we have one the following week that's really on goal setting and motivation, and it's called Small Steps Lead to Big Results. So we do hope that you visit us at diabetes.ca/webinars to participate and to register. For anyone on the line that would like more information on sponsorship opportunities, you're welcome to email us at webinars@diabetes.ca. We do have a virtual health coaching program that's coming soon. We're hoping to launch it in the next few months. So if you'd like to participate in that, or if you'd like any additional information in that, please call us at 1-800-BANTING. And if you've enjoyed the webinar today and you'd like to make a donation, please visit our website at diabetes.ca, or you can call us directly at 1-800-BANTING. So again, we hope you've enjoyed your time today, and we thank you very much for participating. Just a reminder, we will have this presentation available on our Canadian Diabetes website in the next few weeks. And for the questions, again, that we didn't get to, our apologies, but please email us at webinars@diabetes.ca, and we'll follow up with you as soon as possible. Thank you, and have a great day.